When you think about 19th century colonial history, it's easy to get lost. I mean, it all gets a bit bogged down in, dry treaties and these endless military timelines. It's hard to find the human story in all of that.
It really is.
So today we're going to take a bit of a detour. We're zooming in on one person who, for more than 15 years, just completely redefined what it meant to resist an industrial superpower. Emir Abdelkader Algerian.
And this is such a fascinating deep dive because he embodies so many paradoxes. You have this Muslim mystic, a scholar, a brilliant poet.
Right, someone you'd expect to find in a library, not on a battlefield.
Exactly. He seemed destined for this life of quiet contemplation, but then history forces him to become a general. And not just a general, but the architect of a whole sovereign state, all while fighting the French Empire at the absolute height of its power.
So our mission today is pretty clear, right? We need to get to the bottom of how this one man became what our sources call the beating heart of a nation's defiance.
And why his story is so important, not just for Algeria, but really as this universal story of a culture fighting against erasure and a faith standing up against invasion.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We're in the early 1830s, the French land in Algiers. What's the official reason?
Well, the official reason is almost laughably thin. It was a petty diplomatic spat, basically a minor financial argument that got out of hand.
But nobody actually believed that was the real reason.
Oh, no. I mean, historians are pretty much unanimous on this. The real goal was pure power projection. It was about seizing land, resources, a strategic foothold. The spat was just a convenient excuse to kick the door in.
And when they first arrived, the resistance they met was, well, it was pretty much what they expected, wasn't it?
It was fragmented. Algeria at the time wasn't a single unified country. It was this mosaic of different tribes, regional powers. So the initial resistance was, localized, disorganized, easy for a modern army to pick off one by one.
The vacuum of leadership.
A total vacuum. The challenge for the Algerian people wasn't just about fighting the French army. It was about overcoming their own internal divisions first. And for those first few years, that fragmentation let the French advance pretty easily.
Which brings us to Abdelkader. And he's not who you'd pick out of a lineup to be a great unifier. He isn't some political operator or a hereditary king.
Not at all. He comes from a world of deep spirituality, highly educated, a well-known scholar, and his father was this really revered religious leader from the Sufi mystic tradition.
So how does a man like that get power? How does he gain legitimacy?
Well, that's what's so fascinating. When the tribal elders get together, desperate for a leader, they don't crown him king. They don't make him a chieftain.
What do?
They declare him Sultan of the Faithful, Amir al-Mu'minin.
That sounds significant. What does a title like that actually mean in practical terms? It feels heavier than just general.
It was everything. It completely sidestepped all the usual tribal politics and arguments about bloodlines. Its power came purely from moral and religious authority.
So it unified people above their local loyalties.
Instantly. By accepting that title, he framed the whole conflict differently. It wasn't just a political squabble over land anymore. It was a defense of their faith, their culture, their entire way of life.
So the French are looking at him and probably seeing just another local chief, but his own people are seeing the moral protector of their entire identity.
That is the absolute key distinction. And that moral mandate he was given became the foundation for what he did next, which is, frankly, staggering. He didn't just lead an army. He built a modern state from scratch while fighting a war.
That just sounds administratively impossible. How do you set up courts and tax systems when you're constantly on the move, fighting? Where do you even find the people to run it all?
He was a brilliant organizer. He drew on his education, and he saw that the state building was part of the war effort. You couldn't separate them. He set up a capital, tag-demmed, but his whole system of government was designed to be mobile to survive.
Okay, so let's dig into that a little. We know he had courts and taxes. What was he doing that the French just completely failed to see coming?
Well, his vision was, it was civilizational. He set up a fixed tax system. Now, that sounds boring, I know.
Hello.
But it replaced all these random tribal levies. It gave the state credibility, and more importantly, it funded the war in a predictable way. And then he established a justice system based on Islamic law. He got rid of arbitrary local rulings, made sure judgments were fair and swift. That built trust.
And what about the welfare side? You mentioned rudimentary healthcare. What does that even look like in the middle of a war in the 19th century desert?
It was remarkably sophisticated for the time and place. He had mobile medical teams to treat wounded soldiers and also to fight diseases, which, frankly, were killing more people than French bullets.
That's not just about being benevolent, that's strategic.
Absolutely. It preserves your manpower. And it shows the people that this new state actually cares about their survival. His goal was always bigger than just winning battles. It was about making sure the culture and the identity survived, no matter what happened to the land.
So he's building the body of a nation while personally leading its military heart. Which brings us to the battlefield. This scholar turned sultan. He also turns out to be a military genius.
A visionary, really. He knew right from the start he couldn't win a conventional fight. The French had better rifles, cannons, a modern logistics train. It was a total mismatch in technology.
You can't fight a cannon with a musket.
You can't. So he didn't try. He looked at the landscape, and he developed a strategy that became the blueprint for almost every anti-colonial war of the 20th century. Guerrilla warfare.
Using the vast, unforgiving Algerian landscape, as the sources put it. The mountains and the desert become his greatest weapons.
Exactly. He turned the whole country into his fortress.
Hmm.
He didn't use big, slow supply convoys that could be attacked. He used camel routes, family networks. He had supply caches hidden all over.
And his army.
He broke it up into these small, incredibly fast-moving columns. They would strike a French outpost or supply line, and they just vanish, melt back into the landscape.
A phantom general. It must have been infuriating for the French. They have this massive modern army, and they're just chasing shadows in the desert.
It was psychologically devastating for them. He won the war of nerves for years. Just constant attrition. He kept them off balance, bleeding them of resources, manpower, and morale. For over a decade, Abdelkader was, for all intents and purposes, unconquered.
But that success eventually creates a problem of its own. Back in Paris, people are getting tired of this endless, expensive war with no clear victory.
Right, and that frustration leads to a turning point, a really terrifying one. This is where you see the brutal logic of what our sources call the grinding machine of colonialism.
What do you mean by that?
Abdelkader could win skirmish after skirmish, but the French Empire could afford to lose. They had a seemingly endless supply of soldiers and money from all over the world. Algeria didn't. The system could absorb losses in a way his state just couldn't.
So if you can't beat the phantom general on the battlefield,
You destroy the world he lives in. They bring in a new commander, General Brigaud, and he has a simple, chilling mandate. End this war, no matter the cost.
and his strategy is what we'd now call total war.
It's a scorched earth policy. Brigaud understood that Abdelkader's strength came from the people who fed his army, hid his soldiers, gave him information, so he decided to wage war on them.
Burn everything.
Systematically.
Robo-
Brigaud's forces didn't hunt for Abdelkader's army anymore. They marched through the countryside and destroyed the means of survival. They burned villages, torched crops, slaughtered livestock, poisoned wells.
This creates what the sources call a moral and military asymmetry. What does that mean?
It means there's a fundamental imbalance. Abdelkader's army was formidable, but it operated by a moral code. He was the protector of the faithful. But how do you fight an enemy whose main tactic is to starve women and children? You can't. His own moral authority, the source of his power, trapped him. His choices became impossible. Does he keep fighting an honorable war while his people freeze and starve to death? Or does he sacrifice the war to save the people?
It's an unbearable position to be in. His forces started to melt away, not because they were losing battles, but because soldiers had to go find food for their families.
Exactly. And this leads us to 1847. After 15 years of constant war, he surrenders. And it's crucial to understand this wasn't a military defeat in the classic sense. He still had men willing to fight.
It was an act of humanity.
It was a choice,
Yep.
a calculated decision to stop the suffering of his people.
And for this act, he's betrayed. The French promise him safe exile in a Muslim country, but then they just break the deal.
They break the deal. They ship him to France and hold him prisoner for years, moving him from one dreary castle to another.
The irony is just staggering. Here's the man who fought them to a standstill for a decade and a half, and even as their prisoner, his character just shines through.
It really does. Many of his captors came to admire him. He would debate philosophy and theology with French intellectuals. He never lost his dignity or his faith. They knew they weren't holding some common rebel. They were holding a true leader.
And his reputation just continues to grow, leading to this one defining moment. Years later, he's finally released, goes into exile, and settles in Damascus.
Right. And this is maybe the ultimate test of his principles. In 1860, there's a horrific sectarian conflict in Damascus, and a mob begins massacring the Christian population.
And this is a man who fought a brutal war against a Christian empire that betrayed him.
You would think he'd have every reason to stand aside,
Yeah.
but he doesn't. He acts immediately. He gathers his Algerian followers, and he physically protects thousands of Christians.
He sheltered them in his own home, stood between them and the mobs.
He did. It was an incredible act of courage and compassion that won him fame all over the world. Queen Victoria, President Lincoln, the Pope, they all honored him. It just showed that his core belief in protecting the innocent transcended politics, religion, everything.
So we come full circle to his legacy. He didn't win the war in a conventional sense. His state was destroyed. But his story is one of profound success.
Oh, absolutely. His historical significance is immense. He basically wrote the playbook for modern resistance movements. He proved that cultural and spiritual unity could hold a massive empire at bay for a generation. He made them fight for every single inch of ground. He might have lost the land, but he never, ever lost the moral high ground.
The scholar who built a state, the mystic who became a general, and the leader who, even after all that betrayal, acted with a deep, universal humanity. It's what you can only really call a moral victory.
And it shows that true leadership, the kind he had, doesn't come from power or money. It comes from a deep sense of justice, a love for your people that's so profound it overrides everything else.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to think about. If some battles like his are fought not really to be won, but as he said, to be remembered, what does that really mean for our definition of victory, especially when you're facing overwhelming, inevitable force?
A question worth considering.
And a story worth remembering. That's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thank you for joining us.